Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Joe Moore and Kyle Buller here. How you doing today, Kyle?
Doing well, Joe. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Beautiful morning here in Colorado. Tons of smoke from a wildfire, but other than that, pretty good.
The fire near you guys?
Yeah. It's maybe 100 miles out, maybe like 60 miles north of Aspen or something. It's right on the interstate. So the interstate's closed between Colorado and Utah from the smoke. I saw some photos and it's like, you're definitely not going to be able to drive through that. Like you definitely can't see.
So thick. Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah. Like in the canyon itself. It's called Glenwood Canyon. It's beautiful when there's not smoke there. I'll take you there someday. It's on the way to Aspen. It's this enormous canyon. It's like they let you drive through it for some reason. It's awesome. But anyway, getting into it, only a few seats left in Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, Group 1. I think we've got 2 spots left on there as of this recording on Wednesday. So it could be sold out. So if you want to join us for the early group, check it out. The other group will be selling out pretty soon, I'm sure, as well. So we have, I always have to do it in my time zone, 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. Mountain time. And then what times is it for you, Kyle, in the East?
2 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. So 12 p.m. Mountain for you.
Oh, good. I'll be there.
Time zones are confusing. Yeah, so 2 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, great. And it starts September 17. It's 8 weeks. We kind of support you through this whole process of discovery, building your foundations, and getting you a good orientation on where you might want to go with this. You will learn skills that you can use right away in your clinical setting, from asking folks about their microdosing use to anything like, are you a festival drug user? Are you a microdoser? Cool. And what to do with that, in your clinical settings and helping them with integration. This is certainly not like 8 weeks discussing integration and prep. It's kind of just a full survey of the full field, which I think is really important. To have before you go forward. Like if you just take an integration class and you don't really have much foundations, like that could be an issue. So
it's a lot of information and a lot of great interviews as well.
Absolutely. So if you want to check that out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com for more, and feel free to email us if you have any questions about it. psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. So I think actually, let's talk about the Jung class again. Carl Jung class is possibly going to still be on pre-sale by Friday when this comes out.
Imagination
that's an amazing course.
Revelation.
Imagination is revelation. Yeah. The one interview I watched so far is killer with Johanna, and I'm really excited to watch the rest of them. What do you think this is good for? Like, a lot of people are interested in Carl Jung, but they don't really know much. I think it's a pretty good intro on Carl Jung.
Yeah, so Johanna goes through the history of psychedelics within our culture, what was going on in the 60s, and then really an introduction to Carl Jung, his theories, and then we dive into some Jungian ideas, so synchronicity and paradox, and then thinking about the collective unconscious, and just a lot of these different ideas and how they can really help us understand maybe what's going on in psychedelic experiences and just how there's parallels. And then just thinking about Jung's work with the Red Book. That is, if anybody's seen that book, it is kind of like a psychedelic trip, all of his visions. And so we talk about that. We talk about the shadow. So it's also a really great course to pair up with our shadow course with Dr. Ido Cohen and I and a bunch of others. So yeah, if you just want to kind of wrap your mind around like a good intro on Jungian psychology and how it relates to the psychedelic experience, definitely sign up. Johanna has put together a really awesome curriculum here, and I think we're going to try to get some other interviews as well. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, modestly priced. And again, check that out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. I don't think we're trying to do any kind of live supported courses with that yet, but that could be in the future. So stay tuned. If you're not on our email list, join up and you'll hear about everything. Or just keep listening to the show. Either way. Cool. So let's dig in. Very first piece of news, Kyle, that you brought to my attention was Usona published an open source method for kilogram scale production, manufacture of psilocybin. Pretty freaking amazing. I didn't get a chance to dig in there. What did you learn about that situation?
I guess I'll read a little bit here, but what I took away from it is that they're publishing synthesis process via like open science, just so people understand it. And I was actually reading their article, kind of goes in depth on the chemistry and whatnot, and that stuff kind of goes over my head. So probably won't dig too much into that. But you can get access to the journal. It's open source, which is really awesome. So this is from Business Wire. Usona Institute has published a breakthrough technique in kilogram scale synthesis of pharmaceutical grade psilocybin in the open access journal ACS Omega. The scalability, controllability, and reproducibility is newly developed. In this newly developed procedure, demonstrate that a classic reaction can produce pharmaceutical grade psilocybin at a large scale in fewer steps. So that's pretty exciting. This work is now available to current good manufacturing practices, manufacturing labs. Making this discovery publicly available is the result of Usona's open science commitment to advance scientific knowledge in the field. Usona is currently providing GMP psilocybin to qualified researchers at no cost through its investigational drug supply program to advance scientific and medical understanding of the psychoactive compound. The 1.2 kilograms of psilocybin per batch that this process delivers can be used to provide nearly 50,000 25 milligram doses of psilocybin. So that's really exciting. As a FDA drug sponsor, Usona is investigating the therapeutic potential of psilocybin in the treatment for major depressive disorder in a phase 2 clinical trial.
Outstanding.
So yeah, really exciting. I know this has been an issue with Compass, right? So they filed a synthesis patent a few years back, and I know a lot of folks in the field were getting a little concerned about that, right? About them possibly just holding that, not giving it out, even though we've heard kind of, I don't know, multiple things that they weren't going to put that within their own kind of like private use, and they were going to share data. But I know that there was some concern that they could have somewhat of a monopoly over that because they had a synthesis patent. But I don't know.
Realistically, as we discussed, right, there's so many ways to make drugs. Like it's not, what's the analogy here? There's a lot of different ways to cook eggs. There's so many different ways that you can work with molecules, and it just takes creativity. And, I'm glad they just came out with this and made it open.
Yeah.
And hopefully that just kind of secures the future for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful. It makes me more hopeful that these people are out there doing this work and trying to share it. Not trying to lock things down so other people can't do it.
Yep.
Yeah. It needs to be a big ecosystem. And this is a big play in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a counterpoint to all of the kind of more corporate-y stuff that's going on. And I like corporations kind of, but what I don't like is when exclusivity gets in there and say, oh no, you're not allowed to help these millions of people because we have the patent. It's like, well, should you?
Right.
But that's not really what's even happening.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking like a way to look at this. Somebody commented on our Instagram after I posted that they're, like, oh, this is terrible. But
I saw that.
Kind of explaining, I guess, like the ecosystem and what has been going on and why this could be a good thing. But yeah, just thinking about like a corporation finding a new synthesis and being able to patent that and then kind of locking it away and saying it just kind of stays within our corporation. And we're the only ones that can, produce this in this way. Doesn't mean that other people can't find other ways, right? But just even thinking about maybe like what Usona just did is like Sasha Shulgin just releasing, TCal and PiCal.
Yeah.
And just giving out these like cookbooks of recipes, being like, hey, this is all available. It's like, imagine if Sasha didn't release any of that information. I mean, he inspired so many people, and so many chemists probably. What if he kind of just like kept that tucked away and nobody knew about like what he was actually doing?
Right.
So I think that's exciting to be able to like contribute to the field that way.
Absolutely. It's really big. And that's, kind of, I like how we do things here, Kyle, because people can get all of this information, like over 200 episodes of content between you and I and interviews and whatnot for free. And that's an extremely valuable thing, especially when done over the course of years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just being open with research and, when we're co-signatories in that open science pledge years ago. And I thought that was kind of a big deal because it's saying like, yeah, we're going to do all this science. Well, if we do science, and we're not going to copyright the science to make it transparent and open and people can get it.
Yeah.
As opposed to like what a pharma company might do and keep the data private,
right?
Which is kind of ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess what are you doing? Wanting to hold on to everything for yourself, or do you want to try to advance, I don't know, society?
It's a big deal.
And I get it. Like we all, I guess, need a business plan, figure out like how to make businesses work. But I think when it comes to certain knowledge, I mean, when you want that out there for folks, so, you pass it down, right?
Yeah.
Just even thinking, I'm like looking at like all the books on my bookshelf and I'm like, wow, like all these like kind of ideas people have put into reality, and just thinking like, I don't know if anybody's like come across this quote. It's like, how many good ideas die 6 feet under? Like they never get exposed. And kind of like the same concept, right? If we're just like locking away our ideas, like we don't know what type of impact that could have down the line. So I think kind of like the open science and just like open information is kind of like, you don't know what seeds you're planting and what type of ripple effects that has down the line. Again, I mean, we have paid content, right? And that just helps us keep being able to deliver our free content. So we appreciate all the support.
We're not getting money from universities or pharma people, but yeah, we are. Yeah. And, if you wanted to, you could get just about everything we have in the class for free, but you're going to have to spend about 5 years listening to all our podcasts, reading all these books. And, like we're giving away a lot of free seats to this stuff and discounted seats to our classes. So I feel like we are doing our part. And it's still accessible, right? It's not that you can't buy it or get access to it. It's just there's a little bit of a financial hurdle for some people. So, yeah. Whereas like corporate stuff, you would just never get access to the information. Yeah. So it's cool. Like I'm glad to see Usona continuing on what they've been doing. Really hopeful about Usona playing a part here. And someone mentioned Usona being kind of like a price check for a lot of these for-profit companies. So like, oh, okay, like you're going to charge that much, but these Usona approved sites are going to be able to charge way less because they're nonprofit. Hopefully, but we'll see. Time will tell.
Right. Yeah.
Still,
I guess they were
days.
saying that with MAPS as well, right? Like the difference between these nonprofits and for-profits, and hopefully the nonprofits help to keep things in check a little bit. But yeah, I guess we'll tell. The field is rapidly evolving pretty quickly.
Oh yeah. Is it ever? Cool. So anything more on that topic before we jump?
No, if anybody wants to check that article out, we'll link it in the show notes. And if you're interested in chemistry and the journal article, it is open access. So we'll also link that up as well if you want to kind of dig into that a little bit more.
Cool. So next up here, not news, but you and I have been revisiting some of Grof's work. I've been rereading holotropic breathwork the last 3 or 4 days, and it's just as amazing as the first time I read it. Just the ease at which he explains such complicated ideas, or maybe not even ease, just skill with which he explains it just kills me every time. I'm like, oh my God, this is so helpful to hear it this way. And I get more value every time. In particular, this concept of the inner healing intelligence and stuff. Like You've been rereading LSD psychotherapy, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Are you finding similar things, like just like getting your kind of mind blown every few paragraphs?
Yeah, I'm just like rereading it and going, wow. Like I think Lenny was saying on our last call, like he started to reread books he's, read years ago.
Hmm.
And I think as, you advance and your thinking changes over years and, you gain more knowledge about a subject, like you go back and reread these things and you go, oh, okay. Oh wow, that's there. Sweet. Like I must have like either skimmed over that or didn't really read through that before. Or didn't make sense because I didn't maybe have all the language there
Yeah.
or the experience to kind of, you know.
Right. Right. Like as we gain more experience, education, whatever, like the whole thing changes. It's a relationship between you and it. And this new
Mhm.
thing kind of emerges, and it's really freaking cool. So anyway, this idea of discussing the inner healer, which I don't know that we've really talked about too much on the show, or at least lately. So this is this concept of there being an inner healing intelligence in your being, in your living body, that kind of knows when something's wrong, and sometimes knows how to fix it.
Mhm.
Maybe most of the time knows how to fix it. So a lot of people try to like kind of make it into an entity when it's really already just part of you. It's not really a discrete entity. And what are some other words for it? Inner radar.
I kind of distinguish the inner healing intelligence from the inner radar. The
Ah,
way that like, and I don't know, maybe I either read this in the past or maybe just my own way of thinking about it. I don't know if they are mutually exclusive, but the way that I thought about it was like the inner healing intelligence, like, is that natural healing process when you really can like surrender to the inner experience and really trust that experience, whether that is with psychedelics or with breath work, but really allowing yourself to develop that relationship with this process that's going on internally. And the inner radar I kind of always defined as this process that brings things to the surface. It's kind of like this thing that just is scanning in the unconscious, and then it's bringing that highly charged emotion or psychic content to the surface, so then that the inner healing intelligence can then do its work.
right. So I'm thinking it's like a useful abstraction, right? Like as Lenny might say, like these things aren't necessarily real discrete things, but
Yeah.
they seem to be like functions that are inside of us, and
Hmm.
seem to show up all over the place. And I like that distinction though, right? Like if we want to know the dynamics of the things, we've got to like kind of look at it, like what is it actually doing? And I like that
Yeah.
idea of just constantly, is everything okay? Is everything okay? Like that's kind of the radar thing.
Yeah.
And then the healer, informed by the radar, can like kind of push these things towards resolution in various ways. Like
Hmm.
I always love how Stan discusses hyperventilation as possibly a way that the body's trying to self heal.
Mm.
So you get all this anxiety, you get the hyperventilation response. In a normal, non industrialized scenario, that might actually be pretty helpful. But if like it happens in the middle of the street in San Francisco or something, like that could be a situation that could be very expensive. And what happens if like, oh, okay, let's just put, Joe in his room or on the couch for a little while and just help him work through it. And you kind of act like a midwife. It's not something you necessarily anybody wanted to happen, but it happened. And how do we deal with that skillfully as a
Yeah.
culture? And yeah, we suppress it with paper bags and tranquilizers. What was he saying? Like a magnesium injection or something crazy like that.
Mm.
And then, yeah, there's a couple other kind of drug interventions that might be used. And yeah, like I don't think that really counts as a psychotic break, but it is a acute anxiety reaction.
Yeah.
So you might end up on drugs that you didn't really want to end up on too.
Hmm. Yeah. I think sometimes our natural instinct is to want to stop it. Like even from like a provider standpoint, being like, we need to control this. And I don't know, I've never really seen too many people have like a hyperventilation where like maybe
Seen it
they
like
couldn't
twice,
stop
maybe,
it.
with paper bags.
Yeah, I've maybe seen it once or twice, but it does remind me, like I had somebody come in one time. I don't know if I would necessarily say they were hyperventilating. I mean, maybe like a mild hyperventilation attack. They were definitely having a panic attack and just super, super anxious, and their breathing was intensified. And I remember I just sat there and closed my eyes and just kept taking some big, deep breaths with them. And I didn't tell them, stop, everything's going to be okay. That normal kind of like verbal self-soothing. I was just trying to thinking about like mirror neurons and be like, okay, if I'm taking deep breaths, I'm starting to regulate myself. What type of effect is this going to have on this person? So just helping to match their breathing and kind of do it that way, and just kind of show them that I could deep breathe and self-regulate. And they finally came out of it pretty quickly.
Awesome.
And I remember somebody coming in and be like, well, what just happened in there? I was like, I just was breathing with them.
Well, that's really cool. And I would love to see more research on it. Like I tend to see, it seems like people aren't very curious about hyperventilation anymore in psychology or psychiatry. It just seems like it's not an interesting topic. And they're like, oh, we've solved that. It's like, well, sure, you solved it, but what is actually happening? Like, and why is it happening? And why aren't you curious to figure that out? You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, cool, we've got the drugs for it.
Like, I think why I ended up taking that approach, and I think I actually wrote about it in my capstone paper.
Cool.
A little bit, or maybe I had to delete it out at some point because it was just getting too lengthy. But yeah, the editing process. But I think with all those years of like the breathwork experience, thinking like this person is having some sort of emotional response, and thinking about that inner healing intelligence, like I could sit there and try and stop this person from engaging in these really deep emotions, and thinking, how do we get this person just to like, okay, slow down, everything's okay, like you're safe, and just thinking about that more like I'm trying to stop your process instead of just sitting there being like, you're in this and I'm here with you and I'll breathe with you together and we'll get through this. And just thinking about like, I don't know, those times of being in breathwork sessions and watching people go through like really deep stuff. And, as a sitter, you're just there with them and not trying to suppress their experience. And, interesting to kind of pull some of that stuff in at times.
And we've talked about this a number of times too in our discussions about your past, but like one of the biggest issues, well, there's a lot of big issues, but in psychiatry, you get hospitalized, you get that first diagnosis of psychotic break, like it kind of is a stigma that a lot of people don't want on them for a lot of different reasons. You could get started on meds that you really don't want to be on. And not to mention like a stay in a psych hospital could be like $2,000 plus a night. And you were working in this model in Burlington, Vermont, where it's probably half that price, if not less than half. I think you said
I forget the numbers. Yeah, I think it was around like an average of $800 a night.
Right.
I could be wrong. I think it could have been anywhere from $500 to $1,000. I forget what the price was per person to stay. But yeah, just thinking about that versus being at the hospital. Yeah, much cheaper.
Do you think like the early sites, like was there an original Soteria in California at one point, or what was that?
Yeah, that's what the house was modeled off of.
Cool.
Soteria in California, which was a research project funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, streamlined by Dr. Lauren Mosher, who is he was in the schizophrenia department for the National Institute of Mental Health. Went on for about 12 years, and the house just shut down because of research funds drying up. But they had a pretty good success rate of, their whole model was to be with people during these extreme states. And I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was in the 70s, like 70 to 75%, like, success rate of people being able to move through their early episode break and, come out on the other side versus what are we doing here? If somebody has a break, we need to get them medicated, and we view it as a pathology that now they're maybe stuck with this for the rest of their life, or are they having an episode where something psychically is starting to move through them, it's being expressed, and they might just need a really safe place to process that.
Right. It's tricky, but it's important. Like I have a feeling that this kind of thing could be done for cheaper than y'all did it for, but making a lot of this stuff much more accessible. Like in holotropic breathwork, Stan talks about how if someone doesn't land by the end of the workshop and like get somewhat settled and resolved, like a traditional psychiatrist might say, okay, yes, this is a psychotic break. And what do we do? You do your normal interventions. So like optimal for the breathwork and psychedelic world would be to have a place where folks could go and be for, I don't know, days to months to settle and kind of reorganize. And that is that kind of model of spiritual emergence, I think, that Stan talks about. But, you have to have really careful discussions and criteria for psychotic break or possible spiritual emergence, or what's the real difference, and like, are they going to be safe? Yeah. So it's tricky, and I'm hopeful that we'll have more of those soon. People seem to care these days.
The issue is funding, really. I think it's really hard to get stuff like that funded because it's, not usually funded by insurance. And so being able to have to pay out of pocket, if you don't have family, if you're not working, how are you paying for that? Where are the funds coming from? So I think that's probably one of the biggest issues with, these alternative models, is that they're not well funded. And so, it was really interesting how that got started up there. It was like the psychiatric unit got wiped out during Hurricane Irene. And somebody dug up all the old research. I believe this guy, Stephen Morgan, dug up all this old research. And I believe there was a law that they wanted to pass. I don't remember if it was already passed or they were trying to pass it, but to allocate more funds into community mental health centers. And after the psychiatric unit got wiped out, this guy, Stephen, presented all this stuff to the state, and I think showed that the state could also save money by adapting a model like this. And the state fully funded it. I'm not too sure what's going on now. It's crazy to think about, actually. I was only there for the first year. I was there before the house got open, went through all the training, and then, the original crew and us, like, we got the house started. I was only there for about a year. And I was just thinking that they've been open for 5 years, so I have no idea how the program has evolved over the past few years and what's going on. But I think me and the original crew was probably in the thick of it. I remember visiting another place and they said, the original crew usually burns out after a year. And really, we were doing two jobs. We were trying to get a house up and running, still trying to figure out the house culture, going through like policies and procedures, and then trying to be with people 12 hours a day while they're going through their experience. And yeah, that burnt me out. But I also started grad school towards the end as well. So that was also a major shifting point for me to move away from
you're
that.
doing double duty.
Yeah, I just couldn't hold it all. But I thought I could, but it was a lot. But and I'm not too sure what's going on. I'm not too sure, what the funding looks like nowadays. It could have changed over the past few years. But in those original days, that's how it was working. And it was exciting. And I saw some magic. And just thinking about coming back to this, I went in there with a very kind of spiritual emergence framework and realized I had to throw some of that stuff out the window because they weren't the place wasn't really holding that type of framework. And when everybody's not on board, it's hard to really kind of sit in there. But, I had to learn and adapt and realize what I'm bringing in, and, we're working with people, but also bringing in that Grofian framework of this inner healing intelligence and just being able to stick with it for the folks that I think that we really trusted that inner healing process. I watched them come out on the other side. And it was pretty amazing to see that. And if anybody's interested to learn more, we have that spiritual emergence or psychosis webinar up on Teachable. And I think I share some stuff on there about.
Right. That's for free, right?
Yeah, for free.
Yeah, Psychedelic Education Center, if people want to check that out. So I know it's complicated to talk about, but you've seen total transformations with that kind of thing, letting people kind of stabilize for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. There was one incident where it was getting a little hairy, I'd say. And just thinking about like, what are we doing here? And we ended up bringing a traditional healer in for this person, request from somebody. And
How do you mean that? Like a shaman?
yeah, yeah. And it was the teacher that I worked with. I asked him if he could come in and do some work. So we sat down and did some work with this person. And I don't know what happened here, but after that experience, like 2 weeks later, this person had a full turnaround. Was it the traditional healer? There were some other interpersonal dynamics that were going on in the house that could have played a role. Was it the stuff that the healer told this person? The healer said he was also going to do some distance work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's so many variables, so it's really hard to say what exactly happened. But, here's somebody that was drinking like 2 pots of coffee a day and was terrified that, wouldn't go to sleep. They're drinking so much coffee because they thought like staff was, placing thoughts in their head. And, it definitely started to get pretty intense. And then, I don't know, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, saw this person get a job.
Incredible.
Ended up moving out of the house, got an apartment. I mean,
it's a pretty big win, right? Like being able to survive on your own. Like what more can you really ask for from the mental health system? Until we're working on thriving, it's, a transition that I think we can live with, right?
yeah.
And so like shamanic practices included like drumming, journey work, like energy work too of some kind.
We did some journeying. Yeah, so we did some journey work with this person. And then I'm not too sure what my teacher did remotely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always hard to
him.
quantify for sure.
Yeah.
Well, cool. And that's something, keep that in mind, folks. Like we can have these amazing turnarounds in people that look really, really sick through like non-drug interventions. Are they scalable? I think so. It's just a matter of like finding them, doing the research, and maybe we're not making a killing, but we're making healthcare a lot cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And better, I think, really. Like,
yeah, and this was a situation where there's some worry of like how do we proceed? Just seeing this person in the depths of it, and then just a total turnaround, being able to move out, and then also the cool thing about that program was like it was really community oriented. So we always like to invite past residents back to, because the model was very peer oriented. You had peer support workers, but then you also, once people moved through the program, invited them back for like dinners and stuff so that they could, maybe share their experience with other residents and, give some hope, hopefully. Like, hey, you're going through a really tough time, but look, I was able to make it out on the other side, and, I have faith and hope in that you can do the same. So yeah, really interesting experience. And I definitely saw some magic by just being with people, not trying to, really change their experience. And granted, there are times when it was like, yes, medication's helpful, higher level of care is helpful, and we need psychiatry at times, right? And,
well, yeah, like maybe we'll call it traditional psychiatry does have a place. And it is important. It's doing amazing work. It's just not necessarily as evolved as we want it to be. And there's a lot of things stopping that evolution, from, FDA to licensing boards to like fear that you're not going to get your next promotion because you went out on a limb. And, these are not trivial salaries that psychiatrists make. There's a lot of money on the line. So like when there's money, there's, weird considerations that come up. Like, am I going to be able to keep my license and practice if I get a little weird here outside of what is normally accepted? Or how do we do that safely? And, just asking yourself those questions, or am I even in a good position to do that at this point in my life? I think there are people that are there. There's other people that aren't. And it's this whole ecosystem, right? Of like people willing to go out on the edge to like move this thing forward. So it's, it's hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And inner radar, like allowing people to kind of self-heal is a big part of that. Like, how do we kind of support their process, even in the short term or long term?
Mm-hmm.
They're the experts in them, not you. Like Stan kind of like talks about how in a lot of traditional therapy, you're kind of just listening, but then you like try to come up with a great summary for them that might be helpful. It's like, well, is that really the most helpful thing? Hard saying. Like, I don't know. I think I might have framed that maybe incorrectly, but how do you think of that? Like traditional talk therapy where you're like, oh, do you think this could be coming from your issues with your mother? Or like, you know what I'm saying? Versus like having that person.
Well, I think it depends how people are trained and what type of orientation they're coming from, right? Like maybe if somebody was coming from that psychoanalysis, which, Stan was trained in and doing more of that. Yeah. Or, do you take, there definitely are approaches where it's more like really trying to help that person develop their own expertise and their own story, kind of like more of like a person-centered approach. And so, there's lots of different branches of therapy, right? But I think like, maybe we're thinking of like psychoanalysis and tell me about your mother.
Right. Because Freud, he is coming from that framework of Freudian stuff, which is cool because that's been around the longest. But, there's apparently there's no data on like what methods of talk therapy are better than the others. So like, CBT is probably the most studied thing, and that probably has the best data because it's easiest to do research on. But yeah, like Rogerian versus Freudian analysis versus, the gazillion other talk therapy methods out there. Like no real clean data between them.
Yeah.
And what does that say? It says something.
Yeah, I don't know. I always come back to, it's a blend of science and art, right? There's an art form to it. And how do you measure that at times, right? When you see all these different theories, all these different practices, some, might be a little bit more scientific than others. And, other times it feels like an art form. So it's this blend between science and art. And really, I don't know. I know we've come back to this a whole bunch, but yeah, that therapeutic alliance and that connection, right? We're dealing with people. How do we develop that relationship with a person?
Yeah, and it does seem like that we are getting some sort of agreement on that in the field, that the therapeutic alliance is the most important part. So, yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing here. There were some references in the holotropic breathwork book to a thing that they were calling fusion therapy way back, which involved a lot of touching and perhaps like over the line by our standards today. So like, what are the rules right now? Say you're a talk therapist. Are you allowed to give your client a hug?
I don't know. It's kind of like, I know I have friends that, will give hugs and do all that stuff. I think it's, I guess ethically, like on that, not really supposed to touch, but, you definitely see it. I mean, I have friends that do more hugging, or maybe if somebody is going through a tough time, they'll hold each other's hands and whatnot.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like when you're going through, I remember like going through my training, it was like, handshakes, okay, in the beginning, but, touch is not really allowed, or it's could be seen as unethical. But I think things might be slowly shifting. But I think it depends on that person, how that person approaches it as well. And, thinking about like the MDMA therapy and psychedelic therapy, I remember the Mythhoffers saying like, they incorporate a lot of touch into their practice as well, right? Being able to hold hands when somebody's going through that.
It's a big deal. Like to not be able to touch is kind of crazy. Did you know somebody who said like, I just can't practice? It's somebody, maybe Irish therapist, said I just couldn't practice in the United States because I need to touch my clients. Like,
I think it was a story I heard about Stan when he first came over, doing all this body work and stuff early on, and then kind of incorporating some of the stuff that he was learning early on with body work and touch, and then just realizing like, oh, wow, I can't practice, psychiatry, not being able to utilize this within sessions.
Yeah, it's really a wild thing. Like, and probably in your somatic psych program, y'all talked about touching a fair amount. But that's gotta be kind of complicated, right? Like you're getting this clinical training that you can't necessarily use on account of ethics as perceived by the board. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, like, even the United States Association for Body Psychotherapy has their own set of ethics for touch, right?
Mm.
So, why are you using touch at times? And can you justify that? And, obviously, a lot of it is just to help not to, like, cross that boundary between sexual touch and, like, what's sexual touch and then what's therapeutic. So, you could go to something like the ACA, which might have much different ethical guidelines. And then something like the United States Association for Body Psychotherapy has their own guidelines because they're incorporating a lot of these different somatic practices. Yeah, I don't remember. I did a whole ethics paper on this, but some of it's kind of slipping.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like yeah, it's like not the individual's ethics, right? It's like the whole field's ethics. And like there is human fallibility. Like the therapist is not necessarily perfect. Like they are prone to issues popping up. So like how do you protect the therapist and the client and the whole industry or field, right? Like, and having these guidelines in place is good at times, but it's also quite limiting. Like,
Yeah.
so this form of body work that came up in holotropic breath work was around psychedelic therapy, like LSD therapy. And it's called fusion therapy again. And they would get people into a super regressed state. So like become like a baby, and a lot of people who didn't get enough motherly touch or paternal touch or connection, like that kind of thing, is hard to heal. Like I, didn't appropriately bond with the mother figure or whatever at that time. And as a result, you've got a lot of marks left behind. And what do you do? It's pretty intractable. And this way, the same way we can, heal PTSD or whatever, like we relive it, reintegrate that thing and heal that thing, you can kind of heal in the same way with touch. So like potentially with a bunch of skin contact. And this has to be like done very explicitly, saying like, hey, we're going to do this. Like, are you okay with this? And, it's okay to say no, like do all the informed consent type things and whatever other disclosures you need to do. And then say, okay, we're going to do it. And then don't talk people into it. You're like, cool. Then you can kind of heal that kind of lack of bonding.
Yeah.
And, in breath work, we do it through like the forehead, holding hands, kind of like hugging people at times or like getting close to them and giving them a little bit of body contact, which is nice. But it's not to that level of like skin on skin. Yeah. But I think there's something interesting there. And it kind of like leads into like various types of sex therapy, which I think is pretty interesting. We've been hearing from our students about some wild stuff that I didn't really know about lately. But it's out there and it's happening, and apparently it looks pretty good.
Yeah.
So I don't know how the licensing boards are going to feel about it when they find out about it. So yeah, like I'm trying to think of some specific examples from breath work where touch was really important.
I'm just thinking, like, we talk about this difference between errors of omission and errors of commission.
These are all the omissions.
Yeah. So the omission would be, you didn't get touch or like affection. And during a session, you might be craving that. And that can be a really, corrective experience for folks. And then the errors of commission would be like, that body work where we're doing more resisting type of body work. Maybe there's an injury that happened and, they're trying to work through it through the body. And I'm just thinking about a bodywork session. What you're talking about with that fusion therapy, there's a breathwork session that I was facilitating, and I had a pretty good relationship with this person already. And, checked in, this is what they were looking for. And it ended up being kind of like the resisting type of bodywork first, working on some traumas in the body. And then it turned into, this was like the longest bodywork session I had. It was like 2 hours just being with this person, holding their hand, letting them cry in my shoulder, just really hugging them and holding them to, they were kind of back in a regressed state. And, there's that communication saying, if you want to stop at any point, just say stop, and really going with the client and seeing what they want, or the participant, not a client. And so it could be a really corrective experience if that's something that was lacking, right? And I think it's important. I think it gets tricky where, and I think this comes back to like the ethics of why are you doing it? Are you doing it out of your own desire because like you've learned a technique and you think this is what's right for the client or participant? Or is this something that they're asking? And, if it's then sexual asking, I mean, obviously you have to draw that boundary and say, that's not going to happen. But, I think it's important to ask, why would you be offering touch here? Why would you be doing this? And, if it seems appropriate on both sides, then, could you offer that? And, it seemed like that was a helpful session for the person. And I've seen even like Lenny and Elizabeth offer that type of support to people that they usually have good rapport with, people they've been working with for years. That type of body work, you probably wouldn't do it to somebody that you just met or you have like, not a great relationship with right off the bat, or not a strong relationship, somebody that you don't know that well. I mean, because it also takes a level of safety that you trust this person to be able to go that deep in that and feel comfortable with somebody being there on that level as well. So,
right. It's, yeah, like the long bodywork sessions really are interestingly bonding and interestingly helpful, though, like you're saying, they're not, you shouldn't do it with everybody all the time. It's really something you've got to, is the situation right? And even if you start doing bodywork, maybe it's over in 30 seconds. Like it's not necessarily 2 hours. It's like, what does the person seem like they want? What are they communicating? Are they putting in much effort or attention towards you? And is it helpful attention? Like, are they just trying to talk? All that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And I think you start to get into some tricky territory with abuse when it comes to touch. And, maybe as a facilitator or whoever, like, if somebody even seems like they're saying no, right? Like,
yeah.
Because sometimes people can't verbalize that in those. And so you have to be really, really careful on how you approach that. I know of people that have expressed stuff of being in ceremony and they said, I thought I was pretty verbal saying I didn't want that. And, the facilitator, the guide or whoever, had their own agenda and saying, oh no, this is how you relive or how you, come to conclusion of whatever you're going through. I need to do this to you. And I think that's something that from our training in breath work, and the body work is never to do anything to you. It's supposed to be in collaboration. And, so
matching effort.
Yeah. And the participant has total like agency over their experience. And, they say stop or, oh, this isn't working anymore. Then okay. You don't need to force that upon somebody and say, well, I know this technique and, you're going through this and, this is what you need. Right. And this is where things get tricky and why ethics, I think, is important around that and why probably, these things have, why this came up and people don't encourage touch, right? Because it can get into some tricky territory.
Yeah. Can and does for sure. Like there's plenty of lawsuits in the psychedelic world and elsewhere around inappropriate touch and in sessions. And yeah, it's the best thing about breathwork and the way it's structured for me is the group and like group accountability and like you're never alone with the clients really, which is amazing for everybody. Makes you feel safer. As soon as you're like in a room alone with somebody, then stuff can feel predatory and like heart of darkness kind of thing. Like, okay, I'm in deep, way up the river. It's over. And your point earlier, like doing stuff to people, like there's one sexual abuser I know of that says like, okay, I have to start touching your genitalia in order to solve this sexual problem you're having. And so the person's already high. It's like, well, probably not okay. Like that has to be probably a multi-week conversation if that's going to be okay. But still, it's a tough jam. And then another issue we run into is non-trained people trying to do like Reiki or massage on people. in session. And realistically, I don't think we're in holotropic breath work or transpersonal breath work, we're not really into mixing modalities, really. It's like this thing is plenty powerful already. I don't think we need to really add in new things, especially when that person doesn't necessarily have agency.
Mm-hmm.
Like by doing something to them, you're taking away from their agency. And this is one of the biggest reasons why breathwork is amazing, is agency, I think.
I think so too. I mean, that's what kind of turned me on to it versus like psychedelics. Like I'm kind of depending on this thing and kind of like, oh, the spirit is doing the work versus like, oh, wait, I'm here, I'm breathing, I'm doing the work, right? It felt different at times. You said something I wanted to follow up on. It might come back. Oh, just even thinking about like being a facilitator or sitter or whatever, therapist, and just thinking, coming back to the inner healer and inner healing intelligence. It's like, are we fully trusting that this person can tap into the inner healing intelligence? And then when does it cross over saying, well, I know your process and I know I need to touch you this way, right? Or, can you really trust this person to go through their own process and say, well, if I need some sort of touch, I'll ask you for that. And, there were times when in a breathwork session, I'm like, oh man, like I really need my hand held because I'm going through something, but then I can't vocalize it. And then I was just like hoping that something would, my sitter would see me grabbing for them. And, they're probably pulling back saying, I'm not going to do anything. And then I had a hard time vocalizing that. But then I was just thinking, well, that's my own process. Like if that didn't happen, how do I sit with that? And then for next time realize, oh, wow, I got to vocalize this stuff a little bit more. Right. And that's where the work is, not necessarily thinking that this person has to know what's going on with me to then intervene. Okay, well, that didn't work that time. And then I realized, wow, well, I should have vocalized that. And that's where my work is. How do I sit with that?
Right. So like the dichotomy here is, how bad is it if you intervene and it's unwanted or unhelpful? Like that kind of Viking story that we talk about, like cradling the guy that's dying as a Viking warrior as if he was a baby, versus your situation there with the hand where you didn't get the thing. It's all material to work with, and it's all interesting material and perhaps helpful. I think the Viking situation is potentially really bad relative to you being able to, reflect on that.
Right.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And that's something that people should think about. And, we've talked about this one scenario where the guy got a little too loud in the session, and we kind of were unsure if we wanted to shut it down or not. And we just waited. And I think like delaying is really undervalued. Like, oh, you want to do just the right thing at just the right time? It's like, well, what if you do the wrong thing? Why not wait so you don't do the wrong thing? Yeah, there's something there. I think there's some valuable things there. And the field will evolve to kind of get to that point, but it's going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm reflecting back on my sessions from last summer in Jamaica where people really wanted to talk. And I was like, maximum 5 minutes. Be like, all right, like, let's get those eye shades back on. Like you're kind of just distracting yourself in my estimation, but it could actually be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh, bad news. Looks like there's construction next door.
I hear something buzzing in the background.
The best news is that we're at close to an hour. So let's kind of wrap it. So 3 things you can find out about, all at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists is selling out quickly, so get your seat soon. Imagination as Revelation, Introduction to Carl Jung and Psychedelics is up there as well. Amazing stuff. And the course you did with Ido Cohen, Psychedelics in the Shadow Side of Psychedelia. All amazing offerings that you will love and that will help you in this weird landscape of psychedelia. Yeah, cool. Anything you want to throw in, Kyle?
Nope. Thanks for listening. Yeah, I did want to comment on what you followed up with, but maybe I'll save it just because, it sounds like you're starting to have banging.
Well, how about this? I'll go on pause so you don't hear me. And
okay, cool.
we'll just say bye for me. You keep going.
All right. See you, Joe. Yeah, there was something that I was rereading in some of Grof's work where they're bringing up these different scenarios of when to allow somebody to chat versus refocusing a person inward. When are things becoming a distraction, like somebody going to the bathroom, constantly going to the bathroom, right? Trying to get distracted from the work. Is talking actually a person being able to pull themselves out and not confront what actually is coming up. And I think that is, maybe a level of intuition and just having a lot of different experience to understand when to skillfully intervene like that. And, it definitely comes up when sometimes talking is helpful, right? Like maybe there's something that needs to come up that needs to get processed a little bit. But on the flip side, then when somebody might need to intervene, say, maybe you're not actually sitting with what's coming up and you're using the talking or going to the bathroom and movement and all this stuff as a distraction. So yeah, just something I was revisiting and just wanted to briefly mention to follow up on what you were chatting about. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. And yeah, good luck with the construction, Joe. Take care, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.